Okay. Thanks, Boria. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for the invitation, Vertical Crypto, Bill, everyone. It's a huge honor to be speaking to you all from here in London. I'm conscious of how eminent my audience is and excited to see if I can introduce some new ideas. Also conscious of the caliber and range of speakers surrounding me in this cohort. So hopefully I can bring something fresh and interesting. And in any case, any questions you have, feel free to hold fire till the end of the lecture. And then if I'm not satisfactory in my responses, we can have an email back and forth, of course. So my name is Alex Estorick. I taught art history for many years, different kinds of art history, medieval, Renaissance, non-Western, and I also worked for different contemporary art magazines like Flash Art, where I started something called the Uncanny Valley, which is an attempt to bridge AI and contemporary art. It was a sort of prototype, I guess you could say, for right-click save. But obviously, Flash Art is, I suppose you could say, a mainstream contemporary. Started in '67, and one of its first publications was the Arte Povera Manifesto, which was an embrace of poor art. So maybe there's a kind of interesting legacy there in relation to crypto art. I'm not sure. We can discuss. And exactly a year ago today, we launched Right-Click Save as the editorial arm of a software startup called Club NFT, which seeks to support NFT artists, collectors in making their collections secure, but also discovering new artists. And so Right-Click Save is really a kind of test bed, I guess you could say, for a new, inclusive, critical, progressive digital art world, or just art world. Right-Click Save, obviously starting a year ago, it coincided with yet another crypto winter. And also in September, the merge, of course. So when we started the magazine, the crypto space was full of hype and a fair amount of speculation and a fair amount of criticism of the environmental cost of crypto. And I would suggest that both the environmental argument and the notion of the NFT as a purely speculative vehicle have diminished substantially over the last year. And hopefully people feel, if you've read Right-Click Save, that it is filling a void and hopefully replacing a hype-based economy with a new community of voices. And of course, you are that community and some of the lifeblood of that community. And of course, the VCA residency as a way of celebrating and onboarding creators from around the world ties in very tightly with the values that we espouse at Right-Click Save. But I think they're values that need to be preserved carefully as we see perhaps new contracts, exclusivity agreements, and habits, behaviors in the NFT space which seem to mirror legacy behaviors in the mainstream contemporary art world. Of course, there is a reason we have curators. There's a reason we have contracts, and there may even be a reason we have agents. But I think a lot of the, shall we say, critical discourse in the contemporary art world has become somewhat tired. And I think it's also honestly become a cloak for vertical structures, even neo-colonial and certainly neoliberal priorities. And I think that one thing that RCS has tried to do anyway is to freshen things up and to hopefully give the NFT space a critical platform where everyone can participate. I would say one final thing on Right Click Save is that it's also one of the reasons we don't do too many editorials, is that principally our community is our editorial. And what that means is that we actually just, for the first time, removed criticism as one of our categories. That's partly because, from my perspective, criticism presupposes that there is a pre-existing critical framework by which you evaluate art. And my view, and I think the view of a fair few members of our community, is that actually the priorities that undergird the NFT space are sufficiently different. The creator economy is sufficiently different from the mainstream contemporary art world. That we need a new set of foundations and frameworks and principles. And of course, where you have engineers in the NFT space, you have builders. I would like to suggest, and rather pretentiously, that I think building critical frameworks is an equally important form of architecture. I mean, it also happens to be a way to, I think, institute a certain set of progressive values across the ecosystem. But of course, that also requires celebrating a full plurality of communities and voices, which is something that is a kind of ongoing priority for us. And I think also for VCA, which is why we work so well as collaborators. And as Boris suggested earlier, that we've collaborated in the past on events like FemGen, which we were lucky enough to have Connie Bakshi involved, and many other, 22 other female narrative artists. So, this is a long-standing relationship, and I know that in a way I don't probably need to tell you all this, but I think it does help to reiterate why we're doing this. I think, the idea of Right Click Save as a test bed for a new kind of art world is something that I hold very dear. But ultimately, we consider it a community publication, and certainly not the mouthpiece of any one individual, me, Jason, Danielle, or indeed anyone else. We are principally dedicated to the artists as well as the collectors in the NFT space. And what that means in practice is that we do a lot of interviews with artists and conversations, for the reason that it's my belief that if we're going to start a new set of critical frameworks, we should be using the artist's language as the basis for the critical frameworks by which their art is evaluated. And I think in the past, I saw a tweet today which was saying that the contemporary art world is full of stale old narratives, and I think we are trying to imbue a new set of, shall we say, crypto histories. It goes without saying that not only a lot of the artists who benefit from the NFT, people who previously didn't benefit in the mainstream contemporary art world, but also a lot of the narratives on which contemporary art relies, for example, celebrating conceptual art rather than celebrating generative art, reflects a long-standing set of biases within mainstream contemporary art discourse and canonical art histories, or modern and contemporary art histories. So I think, that's my little sort of explanation for why we do what we do, and why we choose to have a section called community rather than a section called criticism, because we are generating a new set of priorities, I think, based on hopefully your guys' thoughts, words, values, priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the really interesting thing about the NFT space is what you see is that the market often prices cultural value, of course, in quite an interesting way. And so we see, props do more or less well, and that in some sense reflects the cultural values that flow through that community. And this is something I talk about with Danielle an awful lot. And in fact, we published a text yesterday, What Next for NFTs, in which Jason and Danielle talk about how We don't really have clear and distinct artists, collectors, curators. We have a hybrid creative entrepreneur in Web3 who is probably a collector. And if they're an artist, might need to be a collector to be a successful artist. Of course, there are also ways in which we are co-creators now, in which artists are creating ways to allow their collectors to participate in the generation of particular outputs, not necessarily only in generative art, or what you might call traditional generative art, rather than new AI, generative AI models and so forth. But that's a little introduction. I'm going to take you through some slides. And what I've decided to do, everyone, is to just talk a little bit about both the aesthetics and also the histories. You'll see that Right Click Save is a community of not only artists and collectors, but also scholars around the world, because we believe that, or at least I believe that scholars, where possible, should be the ones helping to drive critical discussions as they are emerging. We also have a podcast, we do live events, and we've done particularly special live events with Vertical Crypto Art back in December in Miami. So for those of you who maybe arrived late, I used to teach traditional art histories, and what I used to do quite often at the beginning was to separate form from meaning. And of course, those two things are not really easy to distinguish. And indeed, the beauty of art is often their interrelationship and how they magnify each other. But I think, in an attempt, and this is my attempt to hopefully give you all the knowledge I can in 1 hour, I want to start with aesthetics and then move on separately to crypto histories. So I want to suggest that if aesthetics is principally the study of form, or the nature of beauty and the appreciation of beauty, crypto aesthetics is the study of a combination of form and money. And one thing I think probably we can all agree is that for several hundred years, art has been clearly a combination of form and money. And what changed with the NFT, I think, was the transparent financialization of that relationship between the form and the financial aspect. Our first text last year, Brian Frieze said, the conventional art market works the same way as the NFT market. Sure, if you buy a painting or sculpture, you get the painting or sculpture, but that's irrelevant. The art market doesn't value the object you own, it values what the object represents. What you are really buying is an entry on an artist's catalogue raisonné. The principle being that if you'd bought a work that wasn't on a catalogue raisonné, you hadn't bought a valuable work. So I think one of the, and that hopefully people feel is a kind of classic right-click save quote, in the sense that not only does it implicitly celebrate crypto art and NFTs as an alternative economy, it does so by showing you that the traditional art world always operated on these similar terms. It just did so in an untransparent way. So crypto art and crypto aesthetics financializes digital aesthetics, and it renders the relationship between art and money highly transparent in a systematic way, which I think is most unique in art history. So it's very exciting, and I think it's worth reiterating always that this is a really exciting thing to have happened, and I think it's potentially very progressive in its consequences. But of course, as we all know, there are forces at work right now that are seeking, I think, to limit the egalitarian potential of that technology. Maybe the best, most interesting, certainly a quote that I return to an awful lot, is Mitchell Chan's quote from an essay published a few years ago on Sol LeWitt, who's a conceptual artist, of course. And I think this is a particularly important quote, certainly for teaching purposes. He said, non-fungible tokens, NFTs, separate an artwork's expressive or artistic form from its commodity form. There it is again, that separation of the form from the money. From as if to say that crypto art is a hybrid form of art, no longer just aesthetic, separate from the gritty reality of the market. It's actually a transparent acknowledgement that art is a financial vehicle, can be financialized, and it always has been, at least since the early modern period. I want to just add a little footnote here, however, because I often hear this notion that the NFT is just a sales mechanism. The media is the art, and the NFT, oh, that's just the thing you sell, right? I would suggest that is both on a technical level and actually in a theoretical sense, really a gross oversimplification, and is often wrong factually. Not only is that principally because some NFTs are on-chain, most NFTs are a combination of on-chain and off-chain. I think perhaps more generally, an NFT is a combination of a media and a token, or a medium and a token. And that's something that Joe Looney has expressed, the father of Rare Pepe Wallet, which was the kind of prototype NFT marketplace. And I think it's important stating here. From my perspective, NFTs are containers for ideas, and whilst they do involve a combination of media and token, to say that the medium is the form and the token is just pure commodity, I think is overly simplistic, and I think it's important to recognize that. I would also just say one final thing. I think the argument that the NFT is just a sales mechanism is often used, it happens to be, by members of the mainstream contemporary art world, but also certain members of the NFT space, as a way of saying that if you only benefit from the NFT, from the token, if you're hanging JPEGs on the blockchain, you're not a serious artist. So to argue that the NFT is just a sales mechanism is also to exclude a whole load of people who are able to participate in the NFT community and, frankly, this new creator economy because of the NFT. The money is important. Jason said it yesterday, Jason Bailey, Art Gnome, in our text yesterday. It's something we reiterate all the time. And I want to suggest that the money is not something that we should regard as polluting the art. It is an essential component of this expanded art world, or in Jesse Damiani's words, this expanding art world. So, and this is Kenny Schachter kind of early on, kind of calling attention to the fact that NFTs, shall we say, problematize the display of art. Do we display it in a physical environment? Do we display it on a screen? Tyler Hobbs would argue that a digital print is still the highest resolution output by which a work of generative art should be displayed. Other artists like Ganbrud don't care. In fact, they make their work to be viewed on multiple formats, on a mobile, on a digital screen, as a print, as it were. And in that sense, you can see not only a divide between different kinds of crypto artists, but a different set of priorities across the space. The fact that Ganbrud is also a leading collector is interesting, and I think it tells you something about how some artists in the NFT space tailor their work to the collector's mindset. Just to stay with that analogy, Tyler Hobbs obviously recently produced a project called QQL, which gives a lot of agency to the collector. If you have 14 ETH, to buy a mint pass, play with many thousands of possible outputs from the algorithm, then mint your own. What was interesting about our interview with Hobbs was that when I asked, we had all these lovely images, and when I asked, this is obviously Tyler Hobbs and Dandelion Whisk, the artists, but it's also the product of a collector who has chosen this output. What are we going to acknowledge the collector's creative role in this output? And they came back to me and said, yes, we're going to identify these collectors as parametric artists, as in individuals who play with the parameters of the algorithm, which may sound, good or bad, depending on how snobbish you are. But I think it's certainly interesting. And Peter Baum and Monk Antony recently wrote a text for us, which was long overdue, I think, from my perspective, on called Art in the Age of Co-Creation, which I think is an essential component of this space, Web3, and so forth. So I give you some sort of real life examples to back up my points. I think there have been lots of attempts made to engage the public, some more and less successful, but obviously there is something rather wonderfully visually seductive, shall we say, and also often quite childlike about crypto aesthetics. I'm conscious that you've already had a lecture from Jason Bailey, Art Gnome, and I'm just going to recap and maybe give it a twist. So what is crypto art? I have to say, if you ask Judy from Dada, she would probably disagree with this definition. I think it's important to stress that you can either look at crypto art as a moment in time, or you can see it as a set of principles on which to found an ongoing art world. Now, of course, as the editor-in-chief at Right-Click Save, I actually hold some of the principles on which crypto art was born quite dear. This idea that more people can participate, that the NFT is a way of unlocking creativity that was previously incapable of being unlocked. You'll notice, and this is something, I think it's probably fair to say this is my contribution or destruction of the NFT discourse. It is my decision to spell crypto art as two separate words. That is something that will probably offend a lot of the OGs in the crypto space who will, including Jason, spell it capital C, capital A, one word. And I obviously defer to the OGs wherever possible. I think from my perspective, I think crypto art as two separate words, especially lowercase, acknowledges that this is not only a moment in time and even a fetish and a brand and a maybe even a tokenistic moment and style. It's actually more than that. It's actually an ongoing project to build a new creator economy, an expanded art world. And so from my perspective, crypto art, two separate words, normalizes crypto art, normalizes the NFT, normalizes digital art as part of the wider art world. So that's just to explain that separation. Is there anything else? Yes, a global movement toward radical inclusivity, which is maybe a set of principles to aspire to, not always something capable of satisfaction. And of course, I suspect, I may be wrong, Jason and I often use the example of Ozinachi as an artist who in some ways epitomizes a crypto artist. Carlos Marcial is another. Sarah Zucker is often regarded as another prime example of a crypto artist, which is to say someone who has entered the art world via the NFT. And in Ozinachi's case, someone who was not allowed to participate in the mainstream contemporary art world. And so he built his own market on Super Rare without it. And I think that example is something that we should celebrate. The question as to whether those conditions still exist, I think, is a really moot one. I think there's a sense in which a generative art platform like FX Hash does reproduce some of the conditions and some of the openness of that early phase at Super Rare before it became highly exclusive. But there we are. So crypto art, a global movement for radical inclusivity, and I would suggest that Right-Click Save falls within that and seeks to espouse that principle of radical inclusivity. Here are Jason's core components from his text, What is Crypto Art, back in the day. It was early 2018. From my private collection of Jason pics. And now, just to introduce how I came to meet Jason, I wrote a text with a couple of engineers, early 2021, called In Search of an Aesthetics of Crypto Art. And what I was trying to do was to establish what the aesthetic principles were behind this movement. The data set on which we relied to establish the aesthetic principles of crypto art was, see it there actually, it's 22,018 works on Super Rare at the end of March 2021. I think it was decent timing for the reason that the Beeple sale happened in 2021 in March. And from my perspective, that data set of up to March or up to April 2021 is a decent cross-section of the aesthetic priorities of crypto art before it really became a kind of commercial and maybe even rather speculative ecosystem. So it's not perfect, but that was the data set we used. And what we wanted to do, as ever, I'm interested in the language that people use. We studied the tags that artists associated with their works to try and give us an insight into what their aesthetic priorities were and whether that told us anything insightful about the movement. What we found was that futuristic, retro, and sci-fi themes are frequently explored and highly coveted by collectors. The tag 3D is the most viewed, and the NFTs that 3D is associated with had higher selling points, perhaps reflecting a medium specific to crypto art. At the time, you saw a lot of animations and GIFs and 3D works tokenized as NFTs, particularly on Super Rare. I think I remember rightly, of all of the tags on Super Rare, I think 89 had 3D in them. So 3D image, 3D this, 3D that. So, it was even likely that artists were using 3D as a way to raise the value of their work because they understood that a certain kind of branding might increase their selling points. We also found that Instagram did help to drive hype around NFTs. Yes, in general, the number of views highly correlates with price. The hype machine is real. Certainly became real, very real, after March 2021. As in the traditional art world, NFTs tagged with drawing tend to sell for less, which is utterly bizarre because, of course, why should a word necessarily reduce the value of a work? And indeed, I think Operator's recent project, Unsigned, is the classic example of that. A much better example, in fact. The average color palette of NFTs at that time tended towards purple, which we saw not least because of the kinds of motifs and iconography across the crypto art world. We felt that reinforced an aesthetics of tech nostalgia. And my feeling that tech nostalgia is the kind of quintessential quality of crypto art, I have to say, has only hardened in recent years across the full range of different crypto art practices. Some co-occurrence network analysis, and you'll see a couple of a bit of data viz. You'll see that a lot of the tags were, very consistent at the center of that neutron star. But you can see that actually there were quite a few attempts made to segregate one NFT from another. And so you see a load of outlying tags as well, which are those emergences. We also saw clusters of different priorities across the tags. Left, you can see the first 1,000 artist-selected tag combinations. And on the right, you can see the extent to which the Ethereum and Bitcoin communities, at least in the early days of Super Rare, were rather segregated in the tags that they prioritized. In short, and this might be one that you want to copy and paste, I'm very happy to share this presentation anyway. Most common tags, top 5, were 3D, abstract, animation, surreal, and illustration. Originally, GIF was the top 5 in 2021. Illustration is now into the top 5, so that's an updated top 5. 3D, abstract, animation, surreal, and illustration. The most expensive was sci-fi, space, 2D, surreal, and nude. The most popular colors were red and black. Of the top 50 tags, 30 bore no relation to traditional fine art terminology, but as you can see, 5 of the top 10 did. And what we gleaned from that was that crypto art discourse is neither only fine art nor purely new media, but actually it's a hybrid of not only analog and digital, but a hybrid of contemporary art and new media. It's worth just stressing that the contemporary art market and the new media art world have sort of self-segregated for many years. And if you take, for example, Ars Electronica as a kind of, really the beating heart of that new media community, and you take, Art Basel as the beating heart of the contemporary art world, Edward Shanken has pointed out that those two markets, I think, until the NFT, I would argue, self-segregated. I would also say, despite my obvious sympathies for the crypto art community, often over the contemporary art discourse, I have to say that in the past, it has been a tendency for contemporary artists to critique new technologies and new media artists to fetishize those technologies, i.e. to try and push those technologies as far as they will go, rather than perhaps to question the social implications of those technologies, which tends to be a strategy that contemporary artists have adopted in the past. One of the things that I think I've seen in the last year, certainly, and I think one thing instantiated by the NFT is a critical approach to digital technologies, which also acknowledges the financialization of digital art. So I think that is something that I think is we've seen over the last few years. Some different types of crypto art. I don't want to be too categorical here, honestly, because my thoughts change, and indeed. I think people certainly on this call may disagree with me. I have heard a lot of people use the phrase fine art NFTs. Of course, PFPs, profile pictures. One point on profile pictures. I have to say that we should all remember that one of the first PFP projects, if not the most famous, CryptoPunks, is an example of generative art. So the attempt to segregate collectibles, PFPs, from fine art NFTs is really a false dichotomy, and it really inappropriate, I have to say. It's also not very interesting as far as I'm concerned, not least because I think, the NFT introduces a whole new set of categories, a whole new set of voices. It celebrates artists who were previously ignored, including artists who produced what you might call collectibles. So I think there's a really healthy blurring of the line between art and collectible that the NFT brings about. And I could even go so far as to say the NFT renders fine art collectible, essentially collectible, for the first time. That's an idea I've just explored about 3 seconds ago. But I think, the point about the NFT is it does challenge, prevailing structures and knowledges and regimes on which the previous market relied. actually maybe that's no longer fit for purpose. One thing that I think the certain corner, shall we say, of the digital art world aspires to and espouses is works which treat Web3 technologies as a medium in themselves. It is a common refrain of people in the NFT space, especially the people who have been trained in familiar educational establishments and inhabit familiar cosmopolitan centers, to regard only the works that challenge blockchain NFTs and smart contracts or play with them in interesting ways as the only form of valuable crypto art. I have to say, as you might be able to tell, that is a viewpoint I don't have a lot of time for. Once again, because I think it excludes not only a lot of really great, hugely skillful craftspeople around the world, digital creators, I also think it sets up an unhelpful dichotomy once again between the media and the NFT. But that's my perspective. Once again, I don't think the NFT is just a sales mechanism. I think it is also a container for ideas. Of course, we have generative art. Generative art, is clearly an area of crypto art. You could say a branch of crypto art, although in some ways it is both a branch of crypto art and an independent history, which goes back 60 years. And of course, it is something that we hold very dear at RightClickSave, having spent the last year interviewing Vera Molnar, Manfred Moore, Herbert V. Franke, Frieda Naka, and most recently Roman Voroshko, and I'm currently in an email exchange with A. Michael Knoll of that early generation of computer art artists, which is very exciting. And I think it's the point about generative art that I think is so important, and it is really important for the conversation around crypto art in general, is that generative art is really the example that proves that there is a whole art history that has been systematically ignored by the mainstream contemporary art world for the last 60 years. Of course, the NFT is the principal vehicle by which generative art has been given new life. But as anyone, particularly from that generation of Casey Reese, Jared Tarbell, and members from that particular generation will tell you, generative art has been going on not only for the last 2 years or since the NFT, nor was generative art only the last 5 years and the 1960s, but it has a long and ongoing history that we need to acknowledge. I think that the really interesting thing about the NFT, and this is one reason that I am very pro NFTs in a sense, is that they have unlocked, I think, this history and are giving it, hopefully thanks to RightClickSave and other publications, greater airtime. Finally, AI art, of course, it goes without saying that the last year has seen and we continue to see the explosion of interest in AI platforms, Midjourney being only one of them, but also generative AI platforms. I used the phrase AI art yesterday with Marcel Schwittlich, and he said, don't use AI, use ML. And I thought that was really interesting. I think it's absolutely on the button. We are dealing with machine learning, which you could say is a branch of artificial intelligence, certainly. But I think what that conversation told me, ultimately was that the language that we use to talk about this work is still in flux. And I think one of the reasons why we do so many interviews on RightClickSave is because we are, in some ways, we need to track the language as it develops, changes, evolves. And we are in a moment, and indeed I would suggest we are now going to be in a moment perpetually, where a plurality of languages and histories are necessarily interwoven and acknowledged at the very same time. We have a section of our website called Crypto Histories, once called Genealogies, which is principally dedicated to those hidden histories or from that need greater celebration. So here are some encrypted histories. We sort of started talking about aesthetics, and I'm going to finish with the meaning. So we started with form and aesthetics, and I'm now moving on to meaning and histories. These are just some of the encrypted history, shall we say, crypto histories that we've been covering for the last year at the magazine, at Right Click Save. Clearly not all of the critical conversations that we need to address. But I think it just goes to show how exciting, vital, fresh, and novel the NFT conversation is, how varied it is, and how even if sometimes we get tired of the same old voices and tropes, I think actually when we look back on just the last year, there's been a lot of fresh thinking and innovation going on in the NFT space that we need to acknowledge. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to do that. I want to finish with a really sort of, I guess, a personal reflection. I teach art history, but I myself studied medieval art and specifically Byzantine art. And what's interesting about Byzantine art is that it is, in a sense, a pre-capitalist form of art. And the Byzantine Empire ran from 330 CE till 1453. What was interesting about it was it really was a kind of crypto art. I'm going to show you, hopefully, why. Explain that a little bit. But what the history of Byzantine art, I think, does is it shows you an alternative way of narrating art history. And if the NFT is the concept most loathed by the contemporary art world, then Byzantine art is the period historically most disregarded by art historians. And I think that I take particular pleasure in uniting those two, which have more in common than they might otherwise seem to. So, as I said, Byzantine art sort of challenges traditional Western art histories for all sorts of reasons. And I would suggest that the NFT and crypto art history challenges, hopefully, as I've suggested and proved, challenges prevailing narratives around contemporary art. Something that Charlotte Kent and I wrote recently on blockchain time, block time, sort of tried to address this dilemma of how to narrate histories of media after the blockchain, which changes our notion of time. And what we said was crucial to note is that blockchain doesn't operate on time per se, but quantity of blocks, to which humans then assign a familiar temporality like minutes and seconds. And I think that the reason, what that just is designed to show is that to a great extent, the way we see the world is bent through the social constructs that have emerged, like time, like art, and everything else. And I think art, time, these are knowledge regimes that I think the blockchain challenges. And I think that's really interesting and deserves a lot of reflection. And, that's something we try to do. I would say there's a justification also for making these kind of broad and hopefully not sweeping comparisons between Byzantine art of, let's say, the 7th century CE and 21st century crypto art. Reinhard Koselleck's a wonderful historian who developed this theory of historical times, which is essentially a justification for comparing and making these broad analogies across time or times. And for him, historical times expresses the simultaneity of the non-simultaneous, and his geological model of Zeitschichten, of layers of time of differing duration and differentiable origin, nonetheless present and effectual at the same time, reveals the deep media genealogy as a model of alternative narration. And the deep media genealogy, which sounds like a very pretentious term, is really the form of history that reaches back through time and compares Byzantine art with crypto art. For example, the most famous and perhaps the best example, most authoritative deep media genealogy that I have come across is Laura Marks's wonderful Enfoldment and Infinity, which looks at new media art through the lens of classical Islamic art. So this is not just something I'm making up, everyone. It is a viable scholarly strategy. And I think, once again, it's also quite a progressive model for analyzing histories that don't otherwise seem to fit canonical narratives. Okay, so my little Byzantine deep media genealogy is justified by the fact that the coinage, this is the gold nomisma of Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus at the bottom, and an example of a wonderful Christ Pantocrator mosaic. That's the one from Daphne, just outside Athens. The point I'm trying to get at here, everyone, is that in Byzantium, the culture didn't really differentiate between the liturgical art form at the top that you saw in the church and the financial art form, or the financialized image that you see at the bottom. It's the same image, and I would suggest that both had a tactile appeal to the worshipper and to the viewer, or indeed the person who had held the currency in their hand. Byzantine culture did not distinguish religious imagery from that of the coinage. Indeed, to quote Theodore of Studios, the painter, stone carver, and the one who makes images from gold and bronze, each takes matter, looks at the prototype, receives the imprint of that which he contemplates, and presses it like a seal into his matter. In other words, in Byzantium, to incise an image was an act of consecration and a means of animating matter with the magic power of the Holy Spirit. What I'm really talking about, everyone, I'm trying to get you guys to think about actually a financialized form of art, which didn't distinguish between fine art and decorative art, or currency and other kinds of imagery. There was a kind of all-encompassing art world, dare I say, an expanded art world. This is I think, in some ways, the kind of pièce de résistance here. What you're looking at here, everyone, is an 11th century stylite token, a pilgrim token of Saint Simeon Stylites, who was an ascetic saint sitting on top of a column there, who was a 6th century saint. Stylite tokens that you see here, this one is in the Met Museum in New York, known as ologiae, blessings, took the form of terracotta or lead medallions that were stamped in the manner of the consecrated bread and gifted to pilgrims. The way this image functioned was not something that would hang on a wall, not like a painting. It was a ritual object, a very practical and real, to all intents and purposes, image, that if you were too ill to attend Mass, you would burn incense on the token, and you would receive the same level of spiritual grace and medicinal healing that you would otherwise receive from Mass in the church. It's a kind of portable, a devotional token image, but it formed part of a border economy, a pilgrimage economy on the border of the Byzantine Empire. That was not principally a financial currency, it was a spiritual currency, and indeed it formed part of a gift economy. The painting I'm trying to show for you guys, the picture I'm trying to paint, is one of a border economy, a gift economy, that used tokens as a way of commodifying, in this case, the spirit, but perhaps in a more general sense, cultural value. And I'd like to suggest that one thing that NFTs do, beyond their clearly financialized function, is to commodify other forms of cultural value, ethical, unethical, and so on. And I think I use this example more as a kind of, I guess, thought experiment / provocation than anything else. But also, I think, to just try and persuade you all that there are alternative genealogies, there are alternative art histories that are often ignored. And the NFT and crypto art allows us, indeed, I would suggest it requires us, to adopt and adapt these kinds of alternative forms of narration to understand and to see clearly the work that is emerging around us, and also, to a great extent, what we are producing ourselves and what we are co-creating. Because I think what's interesting about Byzantium is it feels a lot more like a kind of hybrid creator economy, which puts the spirit, craft, and other forms of cultural value and exchange together in one kind of unified space, rather than regarding fine art as an autonomous world and realm separate from the gritty reality of everyday life. It was an early 20th century conceit of the Frankfurt School that you have fine art on the one hand and the cultural industry, or the culture industry, on the other. Of course, in the context of the First and Second World Wars, that model, that segregation of fine art from the culture industry is quite understandable, because that mass image culture was being used to enslave hearts and minds across Europe and the world. But I have to say, it's no longer fit for purpose, not least because that fine art is really not quite the glossy world that it once was. And in practical terms, it is a kind of neo-colonial knowledge regime fit for a white educated spectator, and therefore not fit for the world right now, or indeed never was. But there we are. So on that note, I'm at 58 minutes. I'd like to open the floor for questioning, because I'm conscious that was something of a word salad, but grateful for your listening.
Axel, that was a really fantastic presentation. Thank you. I have two comments to just offer immediately. I would like to say that the relationship between the Byzantine art world and our contemporary art world, your pataphysical argument is really compelling. I have to say I'm very impressed by that maneuver. It puts me in mind of Umberto Eco, who continued to argue that the medieval period of our culture is a perfect reflection of our contemporary world right now, and that this seems to me to be part of that experience. Moreover, I would like to say how useful your statistical analysis of tags must be for the likes of us. I can't help but imagine that I will probably use every single one of those tags now on any artwork I might choose to publish. And it puts me in mind of a painting by John Baldessari, of course, who painted a series of tips for artists who wanted to make money, noting right the characteristics of paintings that sell. Right, don't paint hens and cows, paint roosters and bulls. Right, like that. I think that's an amazing thing about your talk. I'm going to take away these two things from your talk: that I should use sci-fi, 3D, and animation in my tags, and that I should look at the coinages of the Byzantine era as a reflection of the tokenization of art, religion, and finance. That's amazing. It's really wonderful.
I appreciate that, Christian. I think what I would say is that I think the follow-up data analysis of any number of marketplaces is certainly overdue. And if you have not written for Right Click Save yet, I would suggest, if you're interested, that I would be very happy to commission that, because that's.
I would probably have to write about the color purple now. Like, I mean, surely. Why not color every artwork purple? That would seem to me to be the filter I would use. I found this a very helpful and interesting, really wonderful analysis of crypto aesthetics. A great summary. I think it's very useful for us. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Questions or outstanding issues? Great.
Alex, do you foresee a moment in our artistic moment where maybe artworks would be detached from the coinages of the currency itself? It seems to me that we have this art form in part because of the invention of new modes of financialization. I mean, will these things eventually become detached from each other? Will it be necessary to actually, pay homage in some sense to the dollar bill or the crypto coin or the Eucharist token that you've identified here?
There's a wonderful book called Art After Money, Money After Art by a scholar called Max Haven. That's H-A-I-V-E-N. And he's actually, we did a conversation between him and an artist called Paolo Cirio. And Max regards contemporary art as fundamentally inscribed by capitalism, which is to say that for Max, there is no real autonomy. There is only a kind of a pseudo autonomy, which is sort of a kind of almost actually a market strategy, as it were. There are other scholars who happen to believe that art can have a temporary form of autonomy even within a capitalist regime. To sort of cut a long story short, Max tends to focus on what he calls money art, which is to say art which kind of probes that essential conundrum about whether art and finance can be detached from one another. I think it does become an ethical question, and I think actually, I don't know if you agree, but from my perspective, I think the idea, this is, by the way, something that you do hear a lot from often very venerable figures in the art world, that art is something else. Art isn't, art's more. Art's beauty. Art's this. Art's that. Art, I will tell you, is one thing and one thing only. Art is a word. As a word, it exists within different ideological habits, behaviors, cultures, imaginaries, etc., etc. And I have to say, art is the ultimate weapon. But I noticed that people are very critical of the word NFT recently. From my perspective, art is really kind of it reflects that essential neoliberal ideology that there exists some kind of autonomous space within even a capitalist, highly financialized economy. From my perspective, to acknowledge the financialization of digital art is to begin to accept that actually finance can support artists, and royalties are, at least for the moment, a core component of the crypto art market, and so on. So I think hopefully, despite the Byzantine analogy, folks can see the logic in drawing these comparisons.
Well, I would concur with you that I'm an avant-garde experimental poet. My whole career is based on the premise that there's an autonomy to art that should be devoid of these other attachments. That art has something special to offer all of it on its own. And I would note that all my favorite artists seem to be artists who also make money. I mean, who are themselves, successful financially. And I think that's an amusing thing to point to. I mean, the artists I admire the most in the history of art were people who eventually, became highly financially successful, sale-worthy personalities, right? I don't think that in the history of art I would point to people who are still languishing in obscurity as my favorite artists. And
all of the Byzantine artists were unnamed craftsmen. So
yeah, exactly. This is about you've anticipated my point I'd be making, is that of course in that era none of this prevailed, right? The anonymity of the artist is a core feature of the productivity.
That wasn't designed to be a facetious, because clearly there are limits to the Byzantine comparison. The point I just wanted to get at is that there have been, as it were, other art worlds in which the identity of the artist has ebbed and flowed. I think clearly a characteristic of craftspeople throughout history has been their anonymity. And what we seem to be dealing with now, which I think is profoundly novel, is the ascent, I would suggest, of a expanded field of not only fine artists, but all forms of particularly digital craftspeople, to renown, they have the ability now to do something the medieval craftsman could not do, which is to elevate themselves as an individual, et cetera, which is why case studies like Ozinachi, I think, resonate so much.
I ask so.
Oh, excuse me.
No. I'll jump in at some point to respond.
Please go.
Yeah, my turn. Axel, thank you so much. Really a very thought-provoking presentation. I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate what I absorbed. I'm fascinated. I absolutely loved so much of it. In particular, the spiritual currency, the spirit and craft, and I don't remember what else you said. The unified space, but I got it. I And then this whole thing about co-creators, us co-creating, and I'm thinking, actually, right now with this conversation, also with Christian, that when I was in high school, my high school was shaped like an alligator, and in the tail of the alligator were the classes that are like craft classes, and in the head of the alligator were like the intellectual classes. And I didn't. I'm a immigrant from Colombia with my family, with my parents. And my parents didn't really understand what was going on. So they weren't pushing me in one way or another. So I just really did what I wanted to do. And I just engaged in whatever classes just wanted to do. So I went into all of it. And I truly, anyway, I'm just, I don't think I'm really articulating um, what I got from this, but it's just really a thought-provoking, fantastic analogy, putting together back to the history of what's happening now. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
It sounds like your college was had that kind of mind-body split built into it. I mean, I think that mind-body split, which is essential to the kind of Cartesian rationalism that undergirds the tradition of fine art, is something that may also be breaking down now as we embrace decolonial thinking, indigenous knowledges, and so on and so forth, alternative forms of alternative regimes, I guess you could say, but I prefer to say, kind of plural knowledges and alternative epistemologies. So I totally, I think, I really appreciate that analogy, actually, because it does show that even today, a conversation about crypto art, it's not really only an art conversation. It's really a conversation about society, politics, ideology, and so on, about knowledge. For me, obviously, that's what excited me about art history in the first place, is that it is a way of kind of bringing together those threads. And I appreciate, the chance to have this conversation, because I think, that is not always the primary subject of interest in the NFT space.
Yeah, that was actually not college. It was high school. And it is true that there are these fragmentations that happen all along the way. And I really appreciate this articulating of the merging of all of these things, which, as you very clearly illustrated, ties back to Byzantine. Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you so much. Very inspirational, thought-provoking presentation.
Alex, I'm going to hop in with a question. Seeing this Starlight token as a logo, as a sort, hearing about this token as a dissemination of certain values. What's kind of conspicuously absent from your lecture is the word brand. And I think that's what's kind of speaking to me here as I'm seeing these images. And it seems like the notion of brand in the contemporary art world has always been something of a murky one. So how would you think about this idea of brand in the crypto art world?
That's a really, really good point. I think, I'm afraid to labor the Byzantine analogy one step. The key word there is imprint. I mean, brand, imprint. What we're talking about here is imprinting, embedding a set of cultural associations into some form of image. And so I love that reference, but for me, that really ties it quite tightly to the imprint, which was the essential quality of all images in Byzantium.
Do you think the people that were using these coins, these tokens, had a notion of brand in that economy outside of like the physical imprint?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the brand was the brand of God. I mean, it was the way of inspiriting, literally, an image. Of course, hype, spirit, very close. and I would suggest, human beings don't change all that much.
I'm inclined to agree.
To be honest, I have something to say on this topic, as I'm from Bulgaria, which is a country that has existed during the Byzantium Empire, and we've had a lot of goings about with them, and in various ways. In a way, these lands here, the Balkan lands, were always known for the different countries and peoples' ways of branding themselves as a country and as a people, as identity of people. And actually, the money that we used was an important symbol of which of the peoples you decided to be part of. And that could be considered, in a way, one of the most primal brands, to be a part of a society and of a societal structure.
Lovely. Yes, and I think that what's interesting about that, of course, the Byzantine Empire was as an empire was highly, it was centralized. And what you're looking at on the screen right now, that gold coin was principally restricted to Constantinople, the capital. But there were these border economies, as you suggest, Boria, that were quite decentralized, actually, and did not have the same level of oversight from the center. And of course, Christ was the ultimate overseer in that context when the emperor was unavailable. Anyway.
Exactly.
I'm afraid I'm going to head off in a couple of minutes. So does anybody have any final questions?
One question, Axel, please. The unified space, you said spirit craft, and then I grasped the last piece, but what was it that you said? I don't want to quote you incorrectly. Spirit and craft, and then one more thing or a couple more things you mentioned are in the unified, are part of a unified.
I would say whatever I said is less significant than the notion of a unified kind of, you could say, imaginary or image world where the economic system, the liturgical religious framework, the political mental structure were sort of interdependent, I would say, and the images that you see here are a reflection of that unity. But just to come back, I think it is probably the point to leave on is to stress that the stylite tokens that you see here, everyone, were an alternative form of currency. They were a sort of gift economy that emerged on the border with Syria, actually. And the reason I just think it's really interesting is what we're looking at right now is an alternative, really, not only a cryptocurrency as an alternative financial ecosystem, much more than that, as a cultural one. The NFT, of course, turns that cryptocurrency alternative into a kind of cultural alternative. I think what's really interesting, if you just keep that thought about a border economy, kind of aggressive thinking on the border, non-monetary currency, I think you kind of cut to the heart of what's best about the NFT space. And of course, in a deep crypto winter, it sometimes feels an awful lot like